I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
It will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies to the charities and issues for which I care so deeply.
After 27 years of unanswered questions and endless speculation, the mystery surrounding Princess Diana's tragic death may finally be unraveling. A retired French firefighter, the very first to respond to the crash in the Paris tunnel, has now broken his silence, and what he reveals could shake everything we thought we knew.
I think there's a sort of sense of both disappointment and exasperation at the palace that the couple feel the need to keep going on about how miserable they were in their royal existence.
According to him, Princess Diana was still alive at the scene. But what's even more startling? Her final whispered words. They planned this.
He arrived, he performed the duties that he knew how to do. He was then advised that Diana needed to be removed from the vehicles.
Why hasn't this appeared in any official reports? What has been kept hidden all these years? This is no longer rumor or a theory. It's a first-hand account that could change the course of history. What this witness saw and heard might force us to re-examine everything about that fateful night. The night it happened.
And so when Diana, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, hit him, she was partially protected by him. When we look at the injuries that Diana had, they were very minor injuries.
The crash was catastrophic. The front of the vehicle was crushed almost beyond recognition. The sound echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot, followed by the screech of tires, the snapping of metal, and the sudden, suffocating silence of disaster. Nearby drivers pulled over, stunned. Calls flooded emergency lines, and within minutes, the first responders arrived on the scene. Among them was firefighter Xavier Gourmelon. This was the scene that led to the untimely death of the Princess of Wales, Diana. When Xavier Gourmelon, a firefighter, stepped out of his emergency vehicle, the atmosphere was surreal. Flashing red and blue lights painted the tunnel walls in a blur of confusion. Smoke hung low in the air, thick with the acrid scent of burning rubber and twisted metal. Crowds began to gather at the tunnel entrance, many unaware of the identity of the victims inside.
I am certain what happened to them. I know they've been murdered, and I'm sure the jury of ordinary people will confirm all my doubts for the last 10 years, which I've been fighting to find justice.
Xavier rushed to the wreckage. The front seats were mangled, the driver already dead. Dodi Al-Fayed was critically injured, his body motionless. But it was the back seat that drew Xavier's attention. There, half-conscious, was a woman, blonde, bloodied, but still breathing. He didn't recognize her at first. To him, she was simply a victim in need of urgent care. Her pulse was faint, but present. Her body was broken, but her will, somehow, remained. He knelt beside her, stabilizing her head, listening for signs of lucidity. And then she spoke. Her voice, soft but clear, trembled through the air with 5 unforgettable words. "Oh my God, what's happened?"
So he and a colleague took her out of the vehicle, placed her on a wooden board, and then placed her on a mattress filled with air in the hopes of preventing any spinal injuries.
At that moment, Xavier still didn't know who she was, but what he did know was simple. She was alive. And for the next several minutes, every second would matter. Diana's final words. As Xavier Gourmelon continued to work over the wreckage, stabilizing the woman in the back seat, he noticed something strange. Amidst the chaos, the flashing lights, the sirens, the shouts of other responders, her eyes were open. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't screaming. She was focused. He leaned closer, making sure she could breathe. That's when she said it. Soft, fragile, deliberate. They planned this. At first, Xavier hesitated. Was it the confusion of trauma? The shock of impact? Victims often mumbled in disorientation, speaking nonsense or repeating questions. But this wasn't that. Her voice was quiet, yes, but steady, intentional. It didn't sound like fear. It sounded like warning. They planned this. She said it more than once. Those words pierced through the tunnel's noise like a whisper into a storm. They cut through the adrenaline, through the sense of duty, through the disbelief. At that point, Xavier still didn't know he was holding the hand of Princess Diana. He didn't recognize her under the blood and bruises, the tangled hair and torn clothing, but something in the way she spoke made him pause. And once the paramedics took over, once Diana was carefully lifted out of the car and loaded into the ambulance, he did what every trained responder is taught to do. He documented everything, every detail, every statement. He made sure to write those 5 words down in his initial report. Because if a dying woman, one who had just been in a catastrophic crash, repeated a phrase like that, it couldn't be ignored. Not by conscience, not by protocol, not by history. But the next day, everything changed. Xavier was pulled aside. His original report was gone, replaced by a cleaner, edited version, replaced with one that omitted any mention of what Diana had said. When he asked why, men in suits gave him firm, quiet instructions. Say nothing. Forget what you heard. At first he obeyed, bound by duty, bound by fear. But he never forgot those words. He carried them for decades, through retirement, through the passing years, through sleepless nights and unshakable memories. Words not shouted in panic, but whispered with certainty. And now, as his health declines and time grows short, Xavier has chosen to speak publicly. Not for fame, not for money, but because of those words. They planned this. And if Diana truly said them, not in paranoia, but in clarity, then everything we thought we knew about that night begins to fall apart. The Vanishing Report.
I think the footage that's been released by the coroner is actually very compelling because we get a second-by-second almost take on what was happening to Diana just before she died, and in that way it's quite haunting.
Xavier Gourmelon had done what any firefighter would do, what protocol demands. He recorded every detail of the crash scene, the vehicle's condition, the state of the victims, the sequence of actions taken, and, most crucially, the words spoken by the woman in the back seat. He wrote it down exactly as he heard it. In trauma cases, especially involving high-profile individuals, such statements can be critically important. And, as Xavier would later learn, the woman he helped pull from the wreckage wasn't just another victim. It was Diana, Princess of Wales, one of the most watched, photographed, and adored figures in the modern world. His report should have become a vital part of the official record. But it didn't. The very next day, men arrived at the fire station. Not emergency officials, not medical supervisors, but men in dark suits. They were authoritative, silent, and not from the usual chain of command. They requested Xavier's report. Then they made it clear. He was to stay quiet. His documentation would not be part of the public record. He was told that Diana's statement held no investigative value and was not to be repeated. Shortly after, his original report vanished. No trace of it would ever appear in the official French or British inquiries. His memory of the moment, of Diana's whispered accusation, was now considered hearsay, unofficial, irrelevant. And yet, to Xavier, it was the most important detail of that night. He wasn't alone. Other responders later hinted that they too were discouraged from speaking publicly, that the chaos on the scene was followed not by transparency, but by control. Paperwork disappeared. Statements were rewritten. Key figures were silenced. What was erased wasn't just a few lines of text. It was a potential key to the truth. Because if Diana said what Xavier claimed, and if that was deliberately removed from the official narrative, then it begs a disturbing question. What else was erased? Was it just the words? Or was it the meaning behind them? The possibility that Diana believed she had been targeted, that she didn't trust those around her, that her death was no accident? For years, Xavier stayed silent, not because he forgot, but because he feared what might happen if he spoke out. It was only after his retirement and facing a terminal diagnosis that he decided the truth was worth the risk. And in doing so, he forced the world to ask, if the official record can be altered, what else have we never been allowed to see? The delayed ambulance.
I think one of the hardest things to come to terms with is the fact that the people that chased her into the tunnel were the same people that were taking photographs of her while she was still dying on the back seat of the car.
Princess Diana was alive when firefighters arrived. That much is no longer disputed. She was conscious, speaking, breathing. Xavier Gourmelon wasn't the only one to notice it. Multiple witnesses, including medical personnel at the scene, confirmed it. Diana was showing signs of life. Her pulse was weak but present. Her voice was faint but deliberate. She was fighting to survive, which makes what happened next all the more puzzling. Once Diana was extracted from the wreckage, she was carefully moved into an ambulance. Her injuries were serious: internal bleeding, chest trauma, and a ruptured pulmonary vein. But still, there was hope. With swift intervention, doctors might have saved her. And yet, the ambulance did not rush her to the nearest hospital. In fact, it didn't move at all, not for over 30 minutes.
But if only she'd worn a seatbelt, she would, I'm sure, still be alive today.
The nearest medical facility, Hôpital de la Pitié-Salpêtrière, was roughly 5 to 7 minutes away. It had one of the best trauma units in Paris and was fully equipped to handle a case like Diana's. Protocol in such emergencies is simple: get the patient to surgery as fast as possible. Seconds matter. A delay can mean death. Instead, the ambulance stayed in the tunnel, administering treatment at the scene far longer than expected. When it finally began its journey, it did so slowly, traveling at approximately 25 miles per hour. At one point, the vehicle even stopped completely just 500 yards from the hospital, citing instability in Diana's vital signs. To some, this might seem cautious. To others, especially trauma specialists, it defied logic. A former French EMT would later remark, "You don't take your time when someone's bleeding internally, you go." By the time Diana arrived, over an hour and a half had passed since the crash. She went into cardiac arrest shortly after being wheeled in. The medical team performed emergency surgery. They tried everything. But it was too late. Diana was pronounced dead at 4 in the morning. Her official cause of death: internal bleeding from a torn pulmonary vein. But what haunts many, including Xavier Gourmelon, is the possibility that she might have survived had the response been faster. Why wasn't she taken to the nearest hospital immediately? Why the long delay? The slow drive? The unexplained stop near the hospital gates? Some have pointed to French emergency procedures, which emphasize stabilizing patients on site. Others suggest there were conflicting directives coming from higher authorities. But neither explanation has ever fully satisfied those who were there nor the medical experts who reviewed the case later. And then there's the context. A woman who, moments earlier, had whispered that they planned this, was left waiting over an hour to receive full medical care in a city with a hospital minutes away. It's a detail that continues to disturb those seeking the truth, not because it's proof of conspiracy, but because it reveals a pattern of decisions that defy common sense. And when lives are lost in the presence of such decisions, they stop being mistakes and start becoming questions that demand answers. The missing car. There was more than one vehicle in the tunnel that night. This is not a theory. It is not a rumor. It is a detail confirmed by physical evidence, eyewitness accounts, and even forensic analysis, yet somehow it was left largely unaddressed in the official investigation. According to firefighter Xavier Gourmelon, as well as multiple witnesses near the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, a second car was seen speeding away from the crash scene within seconds of the impact. One described it as a dark vehicle, possibly black or navy blue. Others identified it as a white Fiat Uno, a small, unremarkable car that would later become a central piece of the mystery. None of the responding officers or firefighters saw the vehicle stop. It didn't assist. It didn't linger. It fled, vanishing into the Paris night. This detail would have been easy to dismiss if not for the paint traces and tail light fragments found on Diana's Mercedes. Forensic teams matched the debris to the make and model of a Fiat Uno, confirming physical contact between the two vehicles shortly before the crash. Yet, the Fiat Uno was never found. Thousands of similar cars were inspected across France, but the one that left evidence on the princess's vehicle disappeared without a trace. No driver came forward. No license plate was recovered. No arrest was ever made. The closest lead emerged years later, when the name Jean-Paul James Anderson began to surface.
I took pictures, yes.
How close did you get?
Oh, I must have been 20 or 30 meters away. I had a 200mm zoom lens and I took some general shots.
A French paparazzo with a reputation for following Diana, Anderson was confirmed to own a white Fiat Uno. He was in Paris at the time of the crash, and according to one acquaintance, he privately confessed that he had seen everything that night. Soon after, Anderson became even more suspicious. He reportedly repainted his car and replaced a taillight matching the one missing from the vehicle seen fleeing the tunnel. Despite this, he was never charged. He denied involvement. And then, in 2000, 3 years after Diana's death, he was found dead in a burnt-out car in a remote forest. The vehicle was locked from the outside. His body was burned beyond recognition. Official cause of death? Suicide. But the circumstances surrounding Anderson's death only deepened public suspicion. Why was the car never definitively linked to him? Why was the lead dropped despite mounting evidence? And why would a man, potentially connected to one of the most scrutinized tragedies in modern history, end his life in such a dramatic and unresolved way? Even beyond the Fiat, Xavier Gourmelon insists he saw a second black car speeding out of the tunnel that night, a detail that supports long-held theories of multiple vehicles being involved in the crash. If one or more vehicles made contact with the Mercedes, causing it to swerve and collide with the tunnel pillar, then the narrative of a lone, drunken driver becomes far less certain. And if the car, or cars responsible, were allowed to disappear, it raises the most critical question of all. Was someone making sure that those vehicles were never found? When paired with Diana's haunting words, "They planned this," the missing car becomes more than a loose thread. It becomes a possible smoking gun, the phantom clue in a story that still refuses to close. The disputed driver.
He was called back to the hotel by telephone at about 10 o'clock, and what he did in the intervening 3 hours to make himself so drunk is uncertain. But this is one of the bars that he frequented.
To believe the official story, everything hinges on one man, Henri Paul, the driver of the black Mercedes that crashed inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. According to investigators, Paul was intoxicated 3 times over the legal limit and was responsible for the high speed and loss of control that led to the fatal impact. The conclusion was clear: drunk driving, reckless speed, a tragic accident. But from the beginning, that version didn't sit right with everyone. Surveillance footage from the Ritz Hotel just minutes before the crash shows Henri Paul walking normally, talking calmly with hotel staff, and even tying his shoelaces without issue. His posture was stable. His speech was clear. Nothing in his behavior suggested heavy intoxication. Xavier Gourmelon, who arrived at the scene shortly after the crash, also found no signs of drunkenness. He didn't observe erratic behavior or any physical indicators. In fact, Paul was already dead when responders arrived, but those who reviewed the footage before the crash have consistently pointed out a stark contradiction between his supposed condition and how he appeared. So, how do we explain the high alcohol levels in his blood? Some experts began asking whether the toxicology results could have been mistaken or manipulated. Could the samples have been switched? Could the numbers have been inflated? Could Henri Paul have been set up? That possibility gained even more weight when it was revealed that Henri Paul wasn't even scheduled to work that night. He had been called in last minute, despite there being other available drivers on duty. Why him? Adding to the intrigue, Paul was found with over 2,000 pounds in cash on his body, far more than what would be expected for a hotel employee of his rank. His personal accounts also revealed significant unexplained deposits of about $200,000 in the months leading up to the crash. French authorities suggested it was payment for private security work, but others weren't convinced. Some insiders claimed that Paul had ties to French intelligence services. Others hinted at a deeper connection, possibly involving British intelligence. That theory gained traction when Lord John Stevens, the head of the British inquiry into Diana's death, privately told Henri Paul's family, "Don't worry, your son will not be blamed." But when the final report was published, Henri Paul was blamed entirely. How do you go from exoneration in private to condemnation in public? To this day, no definitive proof has been shown linking Paul to any intelligence agency. But the pattern of contradictions remains. A sober man labeled drunk, a trusted employee turned scapegoat, a driver inserted at the last moment into a night that would end in global tragedy. For many, including Xavier Gourmelon, this raises a troubling possibility. Henri Paul didn't lose control. He was placed in a situation designed to collapse. Whether knowingly or unknowingly, he became the central figure in a narrative that pinned everything on him, allowing others to escape scrutiny. And as with so many pieces of this puzzle, the truth about Henri Paul may never fully surface. But one thing is clear: he wasn't the whole story, not even close. Diana's prophetic letter.
When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did.
2 years before her death, Princess Diana wrote a letter. It wasn't a casual note or a fleeting thought. It was a chilling message written in her own hand, sealed, and entrusted to her trusted butler, Paul Burrell, with one instruction: keep it safe. In that letter, Diana spelt out a fear so precise, so disturbingly specific, that reading it after the crash feels like opening a time capsule of warning no one heeded. "This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous," she wrote. "My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure and serious head injury, in order to make the path clear for him to marry again." The words were haunting, the tone was fearful, and the prediction, tragically, was accurate. While some dismissed the letter as paranoia born of emotional stress, those closest to Diana knew better. She had often spoken of being watched, of her phones being tapped, of strange figures following her. Friends later recalled that she would sometimes swap vehicles spontaneously, even cancel travel plans at the last minute, because she sensed something was off. She wasn't paranoid, she was alert, and the people around her didn't always take those alerts seriously. At least, not until it was too late. The most unsettling part of the letter isn't just its accuracy. It's that it was ignored. After Diana's death, Paul Burrell revealed the existence of the letter, but it wasn't immediately made public. Scotland Yard reviewed it, but ultimately dismissed it as of no investigative value. No independent inquiry was launched to assess whether the concerns Diana raised in her own handwriting had any merit. How can a direct warning from the victim, naming the method of her death, be discarded so quickly? And if it was truly meaningless, why was it kept hidden for years? Those who believe Diana's death was orchestrated view the letter as irrefutable evidence, not just of foreknowledge, but of intent. A woman feared she would be killed. She documented how it would happen, and then it happened exactly as she described. A crash in a car, a head injury, and no one held responsible. Even if one refuses to believe in conspiracy, the existence of the letter is impossible to ignore. It offers a deeply personal look into Diana's final years, not just as a princess or a public figure, but as a woman trying to survive inside a system she no longer trusted. And perhaps more importantly, it serves as a reminder. She tried to warn us. A voice silenced.
I don't think that we can ever have peace with my family unless the truth is out there.
Gore Malone would later admit that the memory of her final words haunted him for decades. He didn't come forward for attention or money. He came forward because he was dying, and he said the truth could not die with him. And his isn't the only voice long buried beneath the surface of this story. One paramedic claimed that Diana had asked about Dodie in the ambulance. Another said she was calm, even lucid. One witness who arrived moments after the crash recalled hearing a woman say, "Why won't they help me?" But none of these statements made it into official reports. They were dismissed, discredited, or left unrecorded entirely. If Diana spoke, if she knew, even in her final breaths, that something wasn't right, then what kind of tragedy are we really dealing with? A careless accident, or something darker? The notion that Diana was silenced, not only in death, but even in the records surrounding it, adds a deeply unsettling dimension to this story. It wasn't just her body that was broken in that tunnel. It was her voice, her warning, her truth. And for many who still seek answers, that's the greatest injustice of all. She tried to speak, but the world wasn't ready to listen. Not then. The question is, are we ready now? Perhaps we'll never have every answer. But the pursuit of truth, however uncomfortable, still matters. Because if Diana's final whisper was right, if "they planned this" was more than a passing phrase, then the world deserves more than closure. It deserves the truth.